Hello and welcome to Heartfulness Wellness webinar series. This webinar is titled The Challenges of Biodiversity in Asia, A People's Perspective. Heartfulness webinar series and Dhaatri Trust has co-organized this webinar, and we find this webinar particularly interesting and important in the context of the fact that the UN Global Summit on Biodiversity has been organized on September 30th at the leaders level, but we would like the people's perspective, the grassroots perspective, also to be visible in the public arena. We have some of our expert panelists in this webinar, and I welcome Bhanu Kalluri, the director of Dhaatri Trust, Femy, the executive director of Non-Timber Forest Produce Exchange Program for the Asia region, the Philippines, and Dr. Ashok Shrimali, Director, SETU-Centre for Social Knowledge and Action, based in Ahmedabad in India. Also, we will hopefully have Nirupama, who is the Director of Sampoorna Bamboo Kendra, working in Melghat in Maharashtra. So welcome to all the panelists. I am Vanmala Hiranandani, Associate Professor in Global Health and Nutrition, University College, Denmark. We are very happy to have this panel, and hopefully the conversations that we will have today will throw some light on the struggles of people on the ground that live close to the forests in the Asian region, and hopefully this will inform a dialogue with other stakeholders in the arena of ecosystems and biodiversity. I would invite the panelists now to introduce themselves briefly, after which we can take this conversation further. Bhanu, can we start with you?
My name is Bhanu Kalluri. Hello, everybody. I'm based in Hyderabad in South India. We, as a civil society organization, work with the focus on women's rights and protection of women and children, particularly rural women and Adivasi women, indigenous women as we call globally. So we work in remote forest areas in a few villages in Andhra Pradesh. We also network with Adivasi women across India in many of the 5th scheduled states in central India. A lot of our work is around environmental justice and environmental concerns that Adivasi women have in practicing their livelihoods and knowledge systems. So our work is essentially to build women's leadership in order to represent their problems and demands.
Femy?
Hi, good evening. From the Philippines. So this is Femy Pinto. I'm from the Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program, Asia. So we are a network of civil society organizations and community-based organizations that are working towards the empowerment of indigenous and local communities towards the sustainable management of their natural resources. So we are, I am in the regional office, but we have offices in different countries in South and Southeast Asia, including India. But we are also in the Philippines, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, and Malaysia. And commonly across these countries, we work on different issues, intertwined issues that really revolve around natural resources management and indigenous people's rights. So we commonly support civil society action and local actions around promoting the customary tenure rights of indigenous and local communities, on supporting their livelihoods around natural resources, also around promotion and building awareness about wild foods. And commonly across the region, we do take role where it is possible and demanded for us to facilitate networks of civil society organizations working towards pushing for these issues. And in fact, one of the networks that we also co-convene is together with Dhaatri Trust. So this is the Women in Action on Mining in Asia. So we have also other engagements with different kinds of networks that support local communities in the region.
Good, thank you. Ashokji?
Myself is Ashok, and organization name is SETU-Centre for Social Knowledge and Action. SETU means bridge between social knowledge and social action. And my organization working for the rights of tribal community, women rights, children rights since last 40 years in Gujarat and of course national level and sub-regional level also. And my organization is one. If you heard about the famous Narmada Bachao Andolan, it's a famous environment movement. It was initiated by my organization. The Patkar was started Narmada's birth from 5. So basically, we are working for the communities' command over natural resources, whether it is a land, whether it is a forest, whether it is grazing land, whether it is water. So, whose rights? Local communities' rights. And of course, we are also lobbying and advocacy with the policymakers, with the parliamentarians, with the authority. Even sometimes we also intervene at the judiciary level for the community rights. And I'm associate with all these national and international organization for networking and lobbying for the community rights.
Thank you, Ashokji. I was wondering, because Ashokji, since you have to leave, so we have to be mindful of your time. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenges that we face in countries such as India to our ecosystems and to biodiversity. Because there is a lot of talk from the leaders level. Several countries' leaders have gotten together to pledge for protecting our biodiversity. But what does that mean for the people? What does this mean during the COVID-19 times particularly? How has biodiversity and ecosystems been affected in your perspective, from your experience?
Yes, as you know, when we are talking about biodiversity for whom? Who are the protecting the biodiversity, and who are using the biodiversity? See, so in if we are living in a forest area, if we are living in a sanctuary area, if we are living on the bank of river, if we are living on the coastal area, so the local community, local community have a traditional knowledge how to conserve the water resources, how to conserve the forest, how to conserve the even how to friendly with the wild animals also. Because I can say I have my organization work in Gir forest area, in national park area. So since century, many centuries, they co-living with the wildlife. We call the pastoralist community, it's called in local language Maldari. So Maldari is living with the lion, you see, and sometimes lion come to in their settlement. They are eating their buffalo, they are eating their cows, they are eating their goats, but they are enjoying because, and when we are interacting with the community during work, so when the questioning the people, your buffalo, the lion is killing it. So what is the answer? It is lion's food. It's of course it's my, the ownership of buffalo is mine, but it is for lion, and lion is a symbol of mother goddess. So it's a coexisting with the wildlife. Even people are also worshipping the snake. People are also worshipping cow. People are also worshipping tiger. People are also worshipping tree. People are also worshipping the the plants, traditional plants like people puja, you see, like banyan tree puja, like the sagun puja, even like the worshipping of a stone, worshipping of a river. So it's a part of their life. So this, now all these experts, all these biodiversity conservation norms came from Western side. They are not knowing the tradition. What is the tradition in our country? If you read our Prithvi Suktam, so our Prithvi Suktam, what Prithvi Suktam is saying, that Prakriti hi Parmeshwari, nature is a god. So everyone is believing that nature is a god. So whether the nature is like land, the element of nature is a land, water, air, river, hill, rocks, minerals. So everyone is worshipping. So, and even if you talk about this COVID situation, people are came back, in this during the COVID time, people came back to their villages. What they are doing? They are just planting trees, some new plants in this monsoon. In this monsoon, whether if you maybe one can also talk more. In the tribal area, people planted some new trees and people cultivated their land. So they never, they never cut the trees. Whatever, of course, people, but whatever their maximum needs. Now what happens if we are making this human-free forest? What meaning of human-free? I can give you a concrete example. In the Wildlife Protection Act came in India in 1972. And even after 1972, our Gir forest area declared as a Gir National Park. So there are a buffer zone and sanctuary area. What happened that those who are living in the buffer zone, the pastoralists, 845 family, they were resettled from 100 kilometers away from that Gir forest. Till today, the lion is visiting that area. Why lion is going there? So it is a coexisting. So we should think over. Everyone should think over at even international level also. Then man and animal can jointly live in the forest area, and they can, even everyone is talking about the microplant. The forest department every year making the microplant, micro-action plan. So involve the local community. So even train them and discuss with them what kind of the protected area management plan should be prepared. But it's not happening. So even the wildlife like lion, wildlife like even tiger, wildlife like elephant, everywhere people are friendly with them. Even because I'm associated with one national level network called Mines, Mineral and People, and we have our members in Chhattisgarh and Odisha and Jharkhand, and that is the elephant corridor, and even some tiger area also in Maharashtra. Everyone is talking. The most threatened is there the either mining project, hydropower project, coal power based project, railway project, transportation, tourism project is a main threat to our biodiversity. If you just look this India map and the whole area belt, it is started nearby Hyderabad to West Bengal, and just mapping the national park and forest area and sanctuary area. In same area, our government is sanctioning the coal mines and iron ore mines and new railway track, and local community. Local community are opposing that. We want development. We are not against the development, but what kind of development and from whom cost? So this sustainable development. Now everybody is talking about the sustainable development, but nobody is involved the local tribal community for what is the sustainable development for them. What, and even they are not even talking about their culture, about their tradition, about their customs, and all this, you know, uh, it's a part of their life. It's a part of their life. So wildlife is also their part of life. Forest is also their part of life, and the entire natural elements, all for that. The Panch Mahatattva. We are talking about the Panch Mahatattva. Jal, Vayu, Hava, Pradushan. It's a part of their life. So outsider, you know, outsider like tourist is spoiling the forest. Tourists are coming. They are, you know, they are not knowing about any ABCD about any plants. Only local community is knowing the ABCD of that plant. Even local community knows that plant and what is their importance in their life. So this is the thing. It's a most challenge. So now, if the government is thinking that if they are making now all this kind of afforestation are introduced by government of India. Everywhere they are planting the palm tree. They are planting, you know, here like Kerala and Tamil Nadu and some other parts of the country. Now they are planting the palm tree. You know? Okay. Why are you importing other tree? Just develop a local tradition. Why are you not thinking about neem? Why are you not thinking about the sagun? Why are you not thinking about the other plants, traditional plants? A traditional plant can grow the forest, and people can save the forest. And people are always thinking, this is our land. Our land is our mother. They are, you know, this local community are loving to their land more than their mothers. So people are fighting for that. Even people are worshipping the river. The river is our mother, because their entire life is depend on that. So this is
Ashokji, do you think that the COVID-19 situation has affected these communities and their relationship to biodiversity in any way, or is it the same? What have been some of the changes in your observation?
In our experience, yes, it's a good question. You know, people are not disturbing any biodiversity because they know their tradition. Most of the migrant family, the tribal family from my state, like Gujarat. If you look the Gujarat map, the eastern part of the Gujarat, it's known Eastern Tribal Belt. So most of the and from this Eastern Tribal Belt, 4-5 districts, major migration from their district. So now they came back, but you know, they are not disturbing. Even they are planting new plants. You know, they are plugging on the draw of their field. So you know, they are always thinking about their nature, and they are always talking about it, even though most of the new infrastructure projects in this tribal area sanctioned by the government of Gujarat or by the government of India, it passed through that area, and people are opposing. Why people are opposing? Because people are believing that this is our motherland and we have to protect, and our entire livelihood is depend on this land. That's why they are.
And what recommendations or suggestions would you give to the government and or people who are, you know, the at the high level policy making? What kind of recommendations or suggestions would you give to these people to to respect and also protect our biodiversity and also the indigenous cultures?
Yeah, that's you know, whatever the provision under our constitution, under the 5th schedule area, there are a provision. Even the Panchayat and Extension in Scheduled Area Act is there, and all kind of norms are there, and all kind of provisions are there. Just implement, sit with the Gram Sabha, let them consult with the local community and discuss with them and what they want and make the plan. So, first of all, as I pointed out, just to involve a community at all level, from planning level to implementation level, that this biodiversity plan will be success. And what type of development they want. This is very unfortunate in our country that we never discuss with the local tribal community what type of development project they want. They never discuss that. We all, impose the all models.
Thank you, Ashokji, for those very useful and incisive insights. You reflect what the people have to say in some of, actually throughout India.
Yeah.
Bhanu and Femy, I was thinking if we could, because Ashokji has talked about India, I was thinking if we could go with Bhanu first and talk about what is happening in Telangana, and then open up to the larger Asian perspective with Femy. Let us, in the meantime, I will also check if Nirupama has been able to join us, and we can also involve her in the conversation. So Bhanu, if you could briefly tell us about Dhaatri Trust and the kind of challenges to biodiversity that you see in some of these communities and to indigenous cultures, that would be great. You're muted, Bhanu. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Vanmala. Like I said, Dhaatri Trust has been working in tribal villages, and I personally have lived for several years in Adivasi villages in remote forests. And what one learns when one lives with the Adivasi communities is it's a very humbling experience, because there is so much of depth in the way indigenous communities engage with nature, engage with the livelihood and ecosystems around them. And the humility with which they engage with nature is really what one comes out very strikingly. The second thing is it's a very joyful experience, because there is always celebration or always thanksgiving to nature. And there is constant, there are so many festivals. I think any society which has a lot of festivals and festivals linked to nature is a very biodiverse, rich society. Initially, when I went as a young student, I used to get annoyed that I can't have a meeting in a village, because they're constantly saying, oh, today we have this festival, pumpkin festival, or a tuber festival, or a millets festival. So there are like endless festivals, because that is how diverse the the hills are, the forest is, and what they cultivate and what they collect. What was very saddening was that such a rich ecosystem, such a rich knowledge base, which is practiced on a daily basis by the men and women. There is a whole philosophy around it. There is a whole economics around it. And this is in contrast to this kind of a sustainable way of life. The outside world has a completely different vision of development when you look at their worldviews and compare it to the so-called mainstream development economics of development policies. And that is very hard-hitting and direct, where indigenous communities have been historically forced out of their lands, out of their forests, for what we believe is modernization, a necessary process of development. So in Telangana and Andhra, what we have been seeing is a lot of land going for coal mining or all kinds of mining projects or land alienation. Initially, there was a lot of feudal kind of a system where non-Adivasis were grabbing lands. And that kind of land alienation was resulting in people being evicted and being forced to become migrant labor or forced to lose their connection with their sustainable livelihood. So a lot of children getting malnourished because very rich nutrition which was there in the village is no more. A lot of development and urbanization has happened where once if you look at Telangana, for example, even in our Ramayana, there is this whole historical story about Shabari giving all kinds of wild food to Rama when he was going in search of Sita. And if we look at that place today, there's nothing but cotton farming with high pesticide. It's a hotspot of pesticides. So it's a very sad process of killing the biodiversity in this region for what we term as development. And the pandemic has really proved that the way that we are choosing development is really very self-destructive. It's not just destruction of an Adivasi life and Adivasi people. So when we are trying to campaign for or protect the rights of Adivasis, it's interconnected to all our urban lives. It's not an isolated anti-people or an anti-development kind of a situation, but the pandemic has shown that it has hit us first. That urban life, modern life was completely had to be frozen. So nature has, made us all get into a lockdown so that it can breathe. We've been killing nature so much. So, but in the villages, life went on as normal in to a large extent, where there is still biodiversity. The people, Adivasis who are living in the forest still continued with their foraging, and they didn't have to get into a crisis mode for food and for their basic sustenance. Whereas our urban lives, in the lockdown, we still survived because and supplying food from the forest and from their farms. Otherwise, we would have all died if we didn't get the food chain, destroyed. So, so there is, so we want to dialogue with the governance bodies, with on policy issues, on the kind of the direction we are taking in terms of developing the economies that we're looking at are going to be so destructive that tomorrow not only the Adivasis but also the larger population will be affected. While our government is talking about climate change issues, mitigation of climate change or biodiversity conservation, what we are seeing is that the solutions being offered in lieu of this diversion of forest lands and are much more dangerous than the problems of mining or other kinds of destructive forest depleting kind of economic activities. So there is further attempt to, we thought that prudence would prevail with the pandemic, what it has shown and what it has is trying to communicate to us. But the pace at which we are trying to hasten this self-destruction by bringing in much more biodiversity destroying kind of activities, it's very worrying. It's really worrying, and it's happening across the region of Asia. I'm sure Femy will also share a lot on these issues. So it's really worrying that we are not defining biodiversity in its essence. We are just trying to replace a natural forest which we cut for either a mining project or a road or an infrastructure or energy project by saying, look, we are maintaining our forest cover. Like most of the nations at the global level are talking about maintaining 33% of forest cover. And with this, to demonstrate that we are committed to biodiversity protection and conservation. But if you look at the ground, what we are seeing is that there is no biodiversity. It's just monocultures. So it's a few plantations, even if it is half a dozen species or a dozen species. Biodiversity is not, you can't count. Vast, intangible, and there is so much of a, it's not just protecting a lion or a tiger. The lion and tiger are dependent on several other species, organisms, people, local communities. So if this is the kind of answer that we are showing, where on a satellite map you can show that there is 33% forest cover, but if you go to the ground, it's either coffee plantations or tea plantations or eucalyptus or oil palm or even a few trees planted, this is not going to compensate the rich natural forests that our tropical forests have had. And that is going to be real trouble for us.
That's very interesting, what you say, Bhanu. So the sense I'm getting is that one cannot talk about biodiversity without talking about the indigenous cultures that have been protecting these biodiversity in different parts of the world, not just in India. So the two are interconnected, and usually when there is a talk about biodiversity at the global level, the indigenous cultures and the impact of the measures on these indigenous cultures is usually forgotten. Am I right to understand it like that?
Yes. Yes, Vanmala. Very true.
Okay, good. I was wondering if we could bring in Femy into the picture to open us to the larger Asian regional perspective. Femy, if you can talk a little bit about your work, and then how do you think the biodiversity in the Asian region that you're associated with has been affected over the past years, and also especially during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I think I would just start with a concurring with what you're saying, that when you talk about biodiversity and challenges to biodiversity and ecosystems, you can not talk about challenges and threats over indigenous peoples and local communities and their culture. So I wanted to start off with that we know biodiversity to mean more than just diversity in biological resources and keeping the ecosystems, keeping their integrity. But I think the message is the same between what's happening in India and the rest of Asia or Southeast Asia, and that's also why we found each other with Ashok and Bhanu and Dhaatri Trust. It's because of these common issues, and that's why we need to kind of elevate the messages of the local communities. So when we speak about biodiversity, it is more about a sense and source of security of these people. So security of their identity, security of their food, their livelihood. It's really the security of and the totality of their well-being. And so whatever happens, and this is part of their worldview, that I was just in a discussion the other day about what nature or what forests mean to these indigenous peoples in Indonesia. And one of the elders who was trying to strengthen the youth, or maintain that the youth will be able to remember where they come from, the indigenous youth, where they come from. So he takes them regularly to the forest so that they will remember. And he says that the forest is basically like a mother's milk. So it's really the one that nurtures them. So these challenges, I would say, you hit right there, that the challenges in biodiversity is really a challenge, not just of their physical state or conditions of the natural resources, but it's actually challenges that impinge or threaten the security of the people that depend on these natural resources. And so my organization, we are a network of civil society and community-based organizations, and some of these CBOs that we call them are also from indigenous communities. And so a few challenges that I wanted to share that is Ashok and Bhanu already spoke about it, but maybe it's good to reiterate so that we can also appreciate the magnitude of the issues. In a recent report of this intergovernmental science and policy body, IPBES, which is they're putting it out also for discussion. It says that there are over 25,000 species that are threatened with extinction. And of course, where are these species found? So these are mostly in the territories, rich forests and landscapes all over. But one of the problems is that they said that probably 95% of these threatened species, they don't have any data about them. But maybe because it's like government data, you know. But if you go down to the people, they would probably know. They probably will not be able to count or don't have exact information. But I think in terms of the richness of the knowledge and the information lies with them. So one of the challenges is that maybe this knowledge is not reaching the institutions that are now making decisions about biodiversity and decisions about what to do with the forest and the different landscapes. And I got muted. So the question is what is causing this decline? And I think Bhanu already and Ashok spoke about all these drivers of the biodiversity decline. So mining, oil palm plantations, this massive and widespread deforestation and degradation of forest resources. So I think that's one of the key concerns. And basically these factors, these drivers that are all over the place, all over the region. And what's happening is that it is basically threatening directly the customary forests, the customary territories of indigenous and local communities. Our organization is working also towards promoting and ensuring that there is security of these customary forests. The indigenous peoples are also now, like we are part of a consortium, a network that tries to push and also uses the international mechanism that says that there are indigenous and local community conserved areas and territories, and this is widespread. And so our international leaders have signed on to this, that they recognize that there are these ICCAs. But if you go down the ground, this commitment is a bit slow in terms of signing on to what they had recognized internationally and really putting it down into real recognition. So I think that's one challenge, that despite international commitments, we are not really seeing it as fast as the forests are disappearing. So I think that needs to be escalated, or this recognition has to be fast-paced, so that we can cope with if you cannot really stop deforestation, really decisively, then there has to be an equal response in terms of recognition of indigenous community in local areas and territories. Another challenge is, I think it has been going on for a while, but it still exists despite the challenges of development workers and conservationists about this term that we hear about conservation exclusions, that there are many debates and challenges already in the past, but yet we see it that the way to do protection and conservation is not really to barricade or fence out people who are depending on the forests and nature. And yet there are still systems and policies that promote and really practice this conservation exclusion. So I think that's one challenge, to also question that. And then I would say that in the backdrop of this deforestation and degradation, Bhanu and Ashok had also talked about the human rights violation as a backdrop of this deforestation. So that's very worrying and concerning. And in Southeast Asia, we have one of the highest, like the Philippines is the second in terms of environmental defenders threats. So we have the highest and the highest number of deaths of environmental defenders. So second to Colombia. So in Asia, but there are also other Asian countries likewise. But I'm saying that just within Southeast Asia, you've got the richest, most pristine, still intact forests and natural landscapes. But at the same time, you have also the highest deforestation, the fastest deforestation, the highest number of people getting killed because they are protecting the environment. So these are the things that should not also be left out in the discussion of biodiversity. So biodiversity now is cutting through different kinds of concerns and interests, and not just about environment. Another challenge is about forest protection and law enforcement being marred by lack of resources. So again, I would say that you ask about what has been the effect of COVID-19. So I would say that because before COVID-19 came, we are already in a high risk situation. So it doesn't mean that, oh, COVID came, so then it became more it became an issue. No, it's still there. The same issues that have been there in terms of deforestation, destruction, human rights violations, it didn't stop. And in some cases, in cases where the ecosystems are already fragile, when COVID came, then they become even more, the ecosystem became even more fragile, and the people depending on them live even more fragile lives. So one of the challenges, for example, with COVID, forest protection and law enforcement, whether it's by the state or by the people, are now being marred by lack of resources. So if, for example, in situations where it's being run by community or even by government, because of COVID, they said that their budget has not come because now some of the funds have been directed for COVID relief, etc. So some of the protectors of the forest are not getting paid. Some even in the Philippines, they have been making appeals because some of the forest guards and law enforcers who have been volunteering or maybe just getting stipends for going into the forest and protecting, they're now not even getting their allowances. So I think that's one of the things, one of the challenges, practical challenges that are happening at the moment. even some of the community initiatives of related to, say, for example, nature conservation, ecotourism, because of COVID, then movement has been curtailed, and so there's not a lot of income coming in to their communities. But probably that's just some of the issues, and probably not the most dire. Because in some cases where they are already, as Bhanu had mentioned earlier, where they are still practicing very rich traditions and livelihoods, some of them may be more resilient during the COVID time. So I'm really just more describing more fragile communities that are living in already fragile ecosystems. Yeah, I think I'll stop there in terms of challenges, and maybe just to reiterate some that we've already heard from Bhanu and Ashok.
Thank you so much, Femy. That was really insightful. So I think some of the major themes that are coming out is development, which cannot be seen sans the people that are actually living close to these forests or in these forests and close to this biodiversity. And human rights. It's so important that you bring in the human rights perspective while Ashok was referring to the development perspective. These are intertwined, and somehow the development that is mainstream discourse these days does not consider the human rights aspect of it. And it seems to be more towards this kind of mining and infrastructure development that Bhanu was talking about, more the economic perspective rather than a people-centered perspective that looks at also human rights and the rights of nature, which are so interconnected, as Ashokji was telling us. I'm wondering if Niru is with us, if Nirupama is on board, but I don't see her here. So maybe we can keep this conversation going. I wanted to ask Bhanu and Femy yourself, what do you think then are the suggestions and the recommendations that you would want to give to our policymakers also at the international level to address some of these challenges? Maybe we can begin with you, Bhanu, and then move on to Femy for an Asian perspective. You're muted, Bhanu.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, there are, it's very complex. Biodiversity, oh, I think Nirupama has joined. When she has a connection, why don't you ask her to speak?
Niru, are you here? Nirupama? Niru, you're muted. We are glad that you are here.
Yes.
Hi, Niru, welcome. Welcome to the webinar.
Okay.
If you could give us, yes, I'm so happy that that you could finally join us. If you could give us a brief introduction to yourself. I've just mentioned your designation and your organization at the beginning of the webinar, but if you could give us a brief background into what your work is about, and then we could take some of the other questions and some of the other topics. So please, Niru, go ahead.
Okay. I am Nirupama Deshpande. I work in Melghat since 25 years. I work with Sampoorna Bamboo Kendra. I live in a very small village called Lavada. Melghat is a tribal area and reserve tiger forest of Amravati district, Maharashtra. It reports highest number of malnutrition deaths every year. One of the solution on malnutrition problem is employment. So Sampoorna Bamboo Kendra work in Melghat to generate employment to people. We train tribal people and women in bamboo handicraft, jewelry and bamboo housing. They produce bamboo atom at their home in remotest villages and sell it to cooperative, an organization promoted by us. We motivated tribal farmers to plant bamboos on their land to increase their income. To understand Vanmala.
Yes.
Okay, it is okay. I will go further.
Yes. 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 Of course. Please go ahead.
Okay. To understand the challenges of biodiversity ecosystem, we have to understand the nature-centric, people-centric, socio-economic system of the India. At the root of every civilization, there is the economic cause. And the root of every culture, there is the aesthetic sense. And the root of every tradition, there is a philosophy. Mahatma Gandhiji dreamed for India that was a Gram Swaraj, independent village. But in India, socio-economic system was interdependent. Gandhiji also thought of Gram Swaraj, that is village and cottage industry. One of the misconceptions that we have grown up that in India is an agrarian society, but India was a Udyog Pradhan, business, entrepreneur-oriented society, not a Krushi Pradhan. Farming was done to fulfill local need. Until the late in the second half of 19th century, food was not sold in the market. Even today in some parts of India, in tribal village, food is not sold. This is a tradition of India. It is a land of diversity. India is a home of 6 main religions, 52 tribal culture, and more than 1600 languages, dialects that are spoken by 6,400 different castes and other socio-ethnic groups. India may have a lesser geographical area compared to other, but has a great percentage of land, 60% under cultivation. There is a great diversity in soil, climate. That is the main reason why agriculture equipment imported by British rule failed. In the old times, the village ironsmith and the carpenter used to make tools considering the local characteristics of soil, climate conditions, and crop productivity. As India divided into 108 geographical units and had its own unique custom, food, and agriculture. This is the main reason for such a diversity. You get all these changes in 50 to 60 kilometers. 20 कोस में बदले पानी, 30 में वाणी. The dialect of the language changes. The style of wearing sari and dhoti changes. The food changes almost completely. And the architecture also changes. In India, socio-economic system based on Adan Pradan Arthavyavastha, that is giving and receiving, for which evolved a simple barter system. This system, people exchange whatever they had with them and others who lacked the same. So everybody need to do some production work. Apart from salt, everything was needed available in the village or manufacture itself. Indian technology and craft production was so simple, it could taken to the doorstep of the customer from the birth to death. Representative of 5 to 55 jatis, that is artisan and craftsmen, would be present to honor the family which he was associated. 16 Karamat, 16 Sanskar, and 30 festivals were created to accommodate the artisan community to provide livelihood to all. When a child is born, several services into villages came into operation. To cut umbilical cord, a barber was called. A potter gives a special pot to dispose the cut portion. The child is kept in a new basket made by bamboo weaver. A jeweler is called to make golden necklace or a thread depending upon child is girl or a boy. All this takes place in a traditional practices, but important is that serviceman is given a basket full of grains. A jeweler is not paid more than a basket weaver. The rituals were created to keep everyone engaged in the trade. The economic balance was essence. Everything in India designed to evoke certain qualities in the mind of a user. For example, using a clay vessel induces a care and respect in the mind, whereas using plastic pot leads to carelessness. To sell any material coming from outside village, permission of the village head to be sought. No outside produce bought in and sold recklessly. Muslim ruler did not disturb the distribution system. It is the British with their capitalistic mindset who destroyed the internal balance by allowing the product to sold anywhere. If we talk of village industry, craft industry, it is a dependent on small technology. Small technology is managed by the society and big technology manages the society. This is the main difference. The cost of technology in a small business is negligible, whereas big business technology produces more and faces more problems. Small technology breed variety of designs and colors, whereas big business reduces everything to uniformity. Big businesses cannot customize design, whereas our craftsmen carried many designs in their hands and had the ability to produce what their customer demand, one item or many. Big technology eliminates the indigenous designs. We can see the conflict created by the globalization of the retail market going on into the country. Apart from economic disturbance, well-harmonized relationship between the buyer and the seller is getting disrupted. The human element which built the culture is lost. In supermarket, there is a cold relationship between buyer and seller. The seller become just an employee in the transaction. Tribal lives in a nature. They protect nature. It is a fire. If there is a fire in the village, villagers are the first one to run to forest to stop and spreading it. There are many examples. Tribal communities leave their houses when white ants attack the wooden pillar, door, and other wooden material, as they believe the spirit to be respected. Maybe in this process, they contend the spread of white ants, as killing them does not solve the problem. The queen of the white ant is somewhere deep into the earth, laying thousands of eggs. A wise strategy is to leaving ants alone. Tribal communities have believed that naturally grown trees protect the environment completely. The root provides substance and nutrition to insects, leaves and fruits to animals, birds, and to human beings. So they plant mango, mahua trees. What can be the better environment model than this? For example, in summer, there were untimely rain in the night. So next day morning, one tribal fellow came to me with raw mangoes. He said, please purchase it, as you are Jangdi, a non-tribal people. You can eat anything at any time. Why don't you eat this mango? He said, as our religion is not to eat raw mango till Akhaji. That was in the next month. I'm not talking about Hindu, Muslim, or Christian religion. It is a tribal rule not to eat raw mango before Akhaji, a particular day Korku performs puja and offerings to their forefather, and after that they eat mango. If you thought they are silly, they are uneducated, it's wrong. Environment concern is there in this tradition. As the seed of mango is immature, they don't eat mango. If you eat immature mango, you are destroying seeds and thousands of mangoes. This is the simple logic behind this tradition. Same with artisan communities in India. They explore from nature, not exploit the nature. Economy and the life of people used to depend on nature. At a time, there were more than 6,000 varieties of grass were there. So people used to keep cows and whole agriculture was depend on cow. From grass, artisans used to prepare rope and other utility items. Cow dung was so useful, there were no need of fertilizer. Now also in tribal area, people do not use fertilizer and use cow dung, and still they have some local varieties of seed. Artisan-based society explore from nature and do not exploit it. Bamboo artisan cut bamboo from tree. They do not cut it in the dark night, as there is insects in bamboo. As they save insects, not killing them, there are many artisans who use natural material like metal, stone, clay, wood, and leather. There were more than 5,000 household furnaces to produce iron from iron ore. In the tribal area of Jharkhand, this all closed after opening steel factories. In our village, everyone was guaranteed shelter, food, medicine, and the man, that is respect. Everyone has a role to play. They work 5 to 6 hours a day and spend more time with family and friends and attending in matters of spirituality. Today, we have misunderstood the means for the end, and thus we spend all time in making our ends meet, planning for house, car, and career. This fast lifestyle leads to extensive movement from one city to another and another country to another, has disconnected us from our cultural roots and family bonds. Let us accept the fact that there is extreme stress and tension by modernity and westernization. People have either no time or very less time for anything rather than work and career. The family structure is crumbling and no human values. In modern society, transfer from undivided joint family to micro family, and a micro family now only the individual remain. In Melghat, people migrate to work. Due to this pandemic COVID-19, they realize the importance of their village. We help many people to bring back from them to cities, but some of them walk more than 600 kilometers to reach their village. Now they don't want to go outside their village. They get more employment and city like facilities in the villages. They will stay in the village. In August last month, some youth, they moved to Kolhapur to work in some industry, but they return on the third day as there were COVID patients in the area. And of all of them may not get work in the agriculture in Melghat as they have very little land and no land with them. To re-establish forest-based, artisan-based industry and re-establish artisan is the basic we need nowadays. Mostly artisan is a tribal community's major problem today in getting a raw material. So it is needed to reframe our all policies and planning. Now, new products, new items must be established to fulfill a new local, that is a global needs. Nowadays, urban population is the target for market. Tribals and artisan are just not the exhibit for urban people. Online marketing works well as now we are in a global village. We are selling eco-friendly bamboo rakis from last 6 years, sitting in this remote village. Concept of market is changing. People are buying online product in village also, but not selling online due to the pandemic. Due to this pandemic, we have an opportunity to rethink about Gram Swaraj in global way, in protecting rights of artisan and tribal community. So there is a need to reframe laws, policies to support artisan and tribal centric development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niru. That was very refreshing. You've actually opened up the discourse around biodiversity to include human diversity and their relationship with nature and the entire ecosystems approach that we need to take. So that was beautiful. That was beautiful to give us also the historical background and the diversity in India. The other thing that I really appreciated is your mention of Gram Swaraj, which means really village self-rule, translated loosely into English. And in this current moment, when the Prime Minister of India has been talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India, I think it's very important to take up Gandhiji's concept of Gram Swaraj or village self-rule and not just look at self-reliance from the perspective of what the politicians are telling us, but also what that really means on the ground in terms of people's relationship with nature, with their own traditions, with the culture, with the belief systems that they have, which are oftentimes labeled as superstitions. But if you unpack these so-called superstitions, there's a lot of sometimes science behind some of these traditions, like you were talking about, that they don't eat raw mangoes but they wait until the mango seed has matured, so that we don't lose out on the future produce of mangoes, which is a brilliant concept. The urban populace might see it as a superstition, but really there is science and very sound kind of concept that is pertaining to protecting our ecosystems behind these concepts. So thank you, Niru, for that contribution. It was delightful to listen to that. Let us move on to the last part of this webinar as to what are your suggestions? And I would like to hear from each one of you the recommendations, as we were talking about before. Ashok has given his. What would you like to suggest to the policymakers, both at the national and international levels, to protect the biodiversity, to protect the relationship between these cultures, indigenous cultures, that Niru and Bhanu and all of you have referred to, or tribal communities, and the ecosystems? What kind of recommendations would you suggest? What kind of actions can be taken? If we could start with, maybe go ahead with Femy first now from the Asia or Southeast Asia regional perspective, and then come to India. So let's do it the other way this time. So Femy, please.
Before going into recommendations, I also wanted to thank Niru, the previous speaker. It was really beautiful, as you said, Vanmala. And I would also concur with that. Maybe start off my recommendation with what she said about the village self-rule, and also we call barefoot science that she had illustrated. That is one of the recommendations that we do have. We're carrying this recommendation of recognizing that the forest and the biodiversity landscapes are actually a repository of local wisdom, of traditional, very, very strongly rooted in sustainability principles of indigenous systems, knowledge, and practices about caring for the environment, caring for nature, and really leaving for the next generations. So one recommendation is to really push for the recognition of that, and there are frameworks for where and how this can be recognized. And I mentioned earlier about the recognition of indigenous and local community conserved areas and territories, which is already enshrined in the Convention on Biodiversity. So that has to be, these international commitments have to be really translated in policies and also resources down to the national levels. And part of the recognition of ICCAs is the recognition and the support of the documentation of these indigenous knowledge systems and practices, which then will be the basis for saying that this territory has to be protected, because look at how for generations they have really been tamed. And in fact, there is documentation by the ICCA consortium with the registry that we have already globally, that it is in these ICCAs, the ones that are still being conserved by indigenous communities, where you see rich biodiversity, you see really the integral ecosystem still being sustained and well managed. So I think that's one push for recognition of ICCAs and customary tenure. The other one is to mainstream biodiversity in all sectors, as explained earlier, that it's not only the territory or the realm of the economists or environmentalists or foresters or environment officials, but biodiversity has to also be taken up for nature protection, indigenous peoples protection, has to be taken up by food security policymakers, by education even, or across different sectors. This is important as an agenda, and they in the summit, all these different policymakers from different sectors need to talk, and not just the biodiversity specialists. The other one is to really push for. Today we were in a meeting about the human rights treaties, and as I mentioned earlier, that it is the human rights violations is creeping in the biodiversity sector, in the environment sector, and that has to be addressed. And one of the areas that civil society is kind of rallying towards is the push for the legally binding treaty, human rights treaty, so that there is also going to be higher and more decisive push to seek for accountability of corporations, because otherwise there has been very difficult steps that need to be taken by communities, and even by not just communities, but like individual citizens faced with some violation or taking over of their land. So private citizens, local communities, collectives, it has been difficult for them to seek redress with corporations that may be found violating their customary rights or their regular human rights. So I think that that's one that needs to enter also into the agenda, in the biodiversity agenda. And well, yeah, related to that is to look into basically the biodiversity frameworks, ensuring that there are serious provisions related to the safeguards of indigenous peoples' rights and local community rights. I think those are some of the examples one last is about, I also spoke about this in another forum, about ensuring that there is resource support for platforms and mechanisms that will ensure that there is inclusion of local people and communities in policy decision making. Sometimes they are constrained because of distance, language, because they are not organized, and therefore they get excluded in decision making, so they are not heard. So I think our leaders should look into making sure that there are also resources and financing that is provided for mechanisms that will really bring about inclusion of women, of youth, of indigenous communities. So.
Thanks a lot, Femy. That was brilliant. I loved the intersectoral approach that you pointed to. It's not enough just to talk about biodiversity, but to see the interlinkages with indigenous communities, with human rights. You also mentioned education, and all these other sectors, and also business ethics and accountability of corporations. So it's not just one angle or one approach that we can take and say we are protecting biodiversity by these rules, but look at the interlinkages with all other sectors. That was brilliant. And thank you about the point about resources and the need for allowing people to talk at certain platforms and or consulting people before taking any kind of policy decisions. And I think those democratic spaces are pivotal to this entire debate and action around biodiversity and climate change and protecting our environment and so on. Bhanu, I was thinking about you when Femy mentioned about the resources and democratic spaces of bringing in people for consultation and so on. How do you, first of all, overall, of course, what are your suggestions and recommendations around biodiversity in India, particularly in the context that you're working? But also, how do you see the resources, the finances for this kind of work in India today, especially in the voluntary sector? And also, what is happening around the democratic spaces for bringing in people into consultations around issues such as biodiversity in India? If you can, I know these are a lot of questions, but they're all interrelated, but if you can enlighten us about what is happening around resources and around biodiversity in India, and what are your suggestions and recommendations?
Actually, Femy and Niru have really covered the gamut of perspectives coming from the realities that we've all been working on. Now, when we talk about recommendations and policy recommendations, the state is the decision-making body. Ultimately, the state kind of moves the laws and the rules and regulations and monitoring. While it is the state which does all that, uh, I think unless what the state does is influenced by either the corporate bodies and by individuals or bodies of individuals or as citizens. So who influences what, and uh, and whose priorities are dominate the decision-making process, the legal framework, and who pays the price, and how do we measure this price? Uh, that comes to this link of resources and finances and democratic spaces. Uh, I think like both Femi and Niru said, there is a need for a paradigm shift in the very philosophy of how we perceive life at an individual level, at a state level, at a corporate level. So at an individual level, of course, one is like how do we look inward, and heartfulness is a medium that all of us are seeking in terms of bringing this connect with our soul and doing this soul searching as to how meaningful we are living our lives, and how positively, constructively, and harmoniously are we living. So but we as individuals are also moving the institutions, the state institutions, the corporate institutions. So how much do we, carry forward this soul searching for that all of us are seeking into policy decision making, and what is it that we are willing to compromise on in order to, move this so-called development process, and who does it hurt? Uh, so is it only the indigenous people, Adivasi people who are getting hurt in this process? Are they the only ones making sacrifices? Like in the Indian context, it was, again going back to mythology, it was Ekalavya who was asked to give his thumb and sacrifice his skills, his knowledge, in order to accommodate the larger kings and Pandavas and all that. But I think we should stop making this, demanding the sacrificing of the thumb from the tribals, because it's not just the tribals who are going to get destroyed. Uh, but since we are all interdependent, and what happens to nature and biodiversity has a reflects action on the health of our urban lives as well. So when we decide, we want to divert our forests for industries or urbanization, then I think like how one of our village elders, when we were trying to help them uh, when they were losing their land for a bauxite mining case, and the mining company came and said, okay, now how much money do you want for your land? We offered very less. Okay, we were willing to increase it. Now the elder said, okay, how do I quantify my land? Yeah. And then how do I quantify them? And then they said, okay, your mango tree will give 500 rupees compensation. Your tamarind tree will get. Then the elder said, what about all the species in the forest? How do I quantify that? And what about the ancestors who the indigenous people believe still live with them, the spirits? How do you, how do you put a price tag to each of these? And that, so as long as we are going in this tangible, quantifiable, if we believe, then we are really belittling nature, and nature is going to hit back. So, so if we want resources, how many, and we all agree that we need our laptops or we need our mobile phones, we need houses, a lot of things. But unless the environment is protected, how do we balance the ecosystem health with the human needs, and how much is a need and how much is dispensable and exploitative? I think these things have to be at of course at an individual level it may look moralistic or ethics is involved, but since our urban life is so complex and we are getting global, like Femy said, there needs to be some tangible, legally binding instruments which have some fair amount of accountability in how much we cut down our forests, for what purpose, and how do we respect human rights in terms of whether it is labor rights, whether it is indigenous people's land rights, whether it is the pollution, how do you measure the increasing pollution, and are we willing to contaminate our rivers and water bodies and air for that pace and that level of development where it is completely self-destructive. So there is a need for stronger legal mechanisms, because what we are finding, Femi and we, all of us groups have been lobbying a lot on business and human rights, because business ethics and business behavior is leading to a lot of human rights violations. And mere corporate social responsibility is not going to work. It's not adequate at all. You cannot say that I will pollute this river because I need to get my profits, but I'll give some scholarships or some notebooks or build a hospital or give women some clothes, or these are very superficial ways of addressing the accountability issues. So unless we are going to have more stronger monitoring regulatory mechanisms, where I don't think at this stage corporates are willing to self-regulate, then simply saying we respect indigenous people's rights, whereas on the ground what you see is that there is militarization, there's human rights defenders and environmental defenders are being killed, people are losing their land. So this respect is very ambiguous unless that respect boils down to certain legal accountability mechanisms. And that the governments at the global level should be more serious about. We can't be casual about biodiversity protection or climate change mitigation. And we can't flirt around with, just, okay, let's do some plantations, or, let's do some welfare schemes. Is not going to work. And therefore, the influence of the corporates is getting so much more stronger that we see a lot of constitutional dilution happening in India and in the other countries in the region as well. And that is really very frightening and worrisome, because if you're not going to have vibrant democracies, and if you're not going to have very clear, strong laws, then it's going to be trouble for us in terms of, uh, more undemocratic processes of decision making happening. So, so there is a really need for the democracy to be more upheld, for people's voices coming from the ground to be addressed. It's not simply people are trying to create trouble or being anti-development. It's not us against them or them against us. So it's not tribal against a city dweller or an urban or an anti-industry or anti-development. There has to be some kind of a more saner way of supporting and protecting our ecosystem that doesn't destroy the tribal or the rest of us.
Thank you, Bhanu. That was actually fantastic, because you brought in so many very powerful insights here. And what you said about measurement, it's so poignant, because not everything can be measured. Of course, we need science and we need measurements to, for instance, count the number of fishes that have been lost when there is oil pollution, for example. Those kinds of measures are needed, but we also need qualitative indicators, can I say that, to understand what is happening to these cultures, to not just indigenous cultures, but to various communities that are being, sometimes they are being decimated, their human rights are being violated, or like you said, the elder could not put a price tag on the spirits that they would like to honor in these forests that they have done for millennia, and respected their ancestors, or the price tag on a neem tree or a peepal tree. Some of these are sacred mangroves for these people. So I think we need to, at a larger level of a paradigm shift, one can say we need to rethink how we conceive science, how we conceptualize science in the first place, which is so, in a way, modernized, westernized, very rational, intellectual level, but not really reaching the people. And we need to bring in people's voices, people's perspectives in this entire discourse on how do we scientifically measure, quote unquote, measure, or not just quantify, but also how do we qualify what is happening to the environment, the kind of damage that is being created. So thank you for those beautiful insights, and also what you said about the democratic spaces. It's a point that is very well taken, and I hope our leaders could take away some of your insights, all of your insights from these webinars. And it's not just about biodiversity, but it's so interrelated with business ethics and human rights these days that we cannot just say that it's biodiversity and we are doing some fantastic action on protecting our forests, but then we forget about the business aspect and how that is being, it's actually maligning some of these communities. We see in India some of these reforestation efforts, but then reforestation is often monoculture plantations of eucalyptus trees or cotton trees and so on. So it's something that we need to be concerned about in these times. If Niru, are you still there with us? If you could, hello Niru, Nirupama?
Yes, yes, I'm. Yes, yes.
If you could also give us your perspective about some of
Yes.
what are some of your recommendations, some of your suggestions after you so beautifully put together the.
I just want to add, Vanmala, 2 points. Just how much cement we are using in all these development activities, creating roads and building cities, so many things. The amount of energy we are using in our life, everybody, we have to think about it. This is a one point. We have to rethink about the energy. That's what I want to add. Other my suggestions I am given when I lastly talk about. Basically, we want to rethink about the tribal centric, artisan centric development pattern, that again how we will shift into this Gram Swaraj model, that we have to rethink. Thank you.
Thank you, Niru. I was at a related level, I was wanting to ask all our panelists, because you work in such challenging situations, and sometimes this can be traumatic changes that you're seeing on the ground. How do you take care of yourselves? How do you cope? How do you deal with all these emotions sometimes that you might be going through? And we are of course rational human beings, but we are also human beings in that sense. We have feelings. How do you cope? How do you prevent any kind of burnout? How do you self-care? We could start with, perhaps we could start with Bhanu, because you have a big smile on, on your face.
One of the ways we help each other, because we're all the time so emotionally caught up and concerned with the violations on the ground, especially on women and children who suffer a lot of pain because of what is happening to their environment. But that's why we network. We reach out. There is this sisterhood of, from between the Philippines and Indonesia and and also Europe. So there is a kind of a solidarity and reaching out that really helps not only in advocacy and campaign actions, but also in this emotional support to each other. I think that's something which has, for me at least personally, I have found it very helpful and emotionally giving some kind of joy. And we do a lot of dancing also in the when we meet as a network. So there's it's really a stress release when we all meet. Unfortunately, the pandemic is not giving us that opportunity. So the networking and collaboration, I think, has really helped in understanding that we are not alone. Not just that in India there's something happening which is violating, but also in the Philippines. Not that there's comfort in feeling that some other country is also suffering, but there is like coming together, and there's a togetherness which helps a lot.
You can still do this dancing, organize a webinar and do some dancing, although you would be doing it alone, but still it's some kind of physical activity. That's just a joke. But Femy, do you want to go next? You're muted. Yeah.
Right now, that's the self-care bit is partly hampered by COVID, because I would say with what I would agree with what Bhanu said about our work in itself is also, and the side in which we are on, it also facilitates self-care, because you do have this network and solidarity that is inherent in also the kind of strategies that we support. But like right now, I am kind of getting stressed because of not being able to go out. Philippines is one of the our COVID situation is quite challenging. So I haven't been able to travel for 7 months, or just about that time, which is very unusual, because I usually am out and about, and that's where I draw my energy and my inspiration. So right now I'm kind of stumped because I don't know. It sort of disrupts the the routine, or at least the lifestyle, in a way that I have been able to craft by being in this kind of work, and how the coping mechanisms that I have sort of built within this kind of work. So just this week, I have been actually reaching out and complaining, because it's too much of the there are also some people who are also in our field, some friends of mine, a friend of mine who just recently died because of COVID. So, and then on top of that, I have all these different things to do. So just this week, literally, I've been kind of asking about that, like how do you just slow down and step back, because even at the personal level, you can't kind of grieve in a way, because there are so many things to do. So yeah, that's a challenge, not a biodiversity challenge. But yes, I would agree with Bhanu about our work facilitates also this self-care, and in fact, for this women work that we do, we have also been discussing about this, and reminding each other to not neglect, because we all understand that the work and the challenges are there, but at the end of the day, you need to also nurture yourself.
Well said. Very well said. Niru, can we hear from you about this? Niru?
Yes, Vanmala. I work with this artisan. This is a creative work. Every day we are doing something new, some new designs. And it is like extended family for me, working with artisans, like a big joint family. And staying in this small village in Lavada, it is still a village. I get a lot of energy from people and a peaceful life here. Okay, thank you.
That's fantastic. It's good to know a simple life close to nature. That is your way of coping. Wonderful. I just and it's also Femi and Bhanu. It's good to hear that this kind of solidarity that you have, supporting one another through the network, is so powerful. And I hope this kind of coping strategy that you have will continue despite COVID-19 and the
I
fact
want
that
to
we are.
also add one point here, Vanmala,
Sure.
that it's, the energy for us comes from the women on the ground. They are so full of life, so full of knowledge. And on one side, no matter how much of a challenge or battles they are fighting, they are still holding on. There is a lot of resilience, as Penny had earlier said. And every time I am facing a personal problem or anxiety, I keep thinking, if this woman affected by mining is having silicosis, the widow of a silicosis victim, and has children single-handedly, if she can have the positive approach to life to handle it, then I have no business to complain about anything in life. So they are the ones who really give a lot of strength. And also there is a lot of knowledge. Like today, from the field, one of our activists called and said that a tribal woman has come up with her own seed strain, which can be patented now. And that's exciting. So, women's knowledge practices and the way they still come up with creativity, whether it's in agriculture or in poetry, or in any forest part, I think that is something which keeps us going and feeling the passion that we have to protect it no matter what happens.
That's fantastic. It's wonderful to hear that these women and these communities that we work with give us inspiration and keep us going on despite the challenges that they face. And sometimes we feel that our own challenges are nothing compared to theirs. So it's such an inspiring way to look at the entire scenario. So with that, we come to the end of the webinar, unless someone wants to add anything that they have missed out. So let's take a moment if panelists, any of the panelists would like to add something. I believe Ashok has left, but Niru, Femi and Bhanu, if you would like to add something that we have covered a lot of ground, but if you can think of something that we have not yet really touched upon, that you would like to share, perhaps we can take a moment to think about and do that right now.
I think now we have to meditate.
Yes.
Hi everyone. Do you live in a city or town? Do you commute to school or work? Do you have a heavy workload? Not enough time for relaxation and time to just be? Do you have worldly worries? Do you sit at a desk for much of the day? Chances are that if you have answered yes to any of the above questions, you are sometimes stressed and your body tenses in certain places as a result. Most of us don't take the time during the day to relax and let our bodies unwind. This simple relaxation method only takes a few minutes and can be done at any time of the day and anywhere. It's called Heartfulness Relaxation. Let's try it. Sit comfortably and close your eyes. very softly and very gently. Let's begin with the toes. Wiggle your toes. Now feel them relax. Feel the healing energy of Mother Earth move up into your feet and ankles, then up to your knees, relaxing the lower legs. Feel the healing energy move further up your legs. Relax your thighs. Now deeply relax your hips, lower body, and waist. Relax your back. From the top to the bottom, the entire back is relaxed. Relax your chest and shoulders. Feel your shoulders simply melting away. Relax your upper arms. Relax each muscle in your forearms, your hands, right up to your fingertips. Relax your neck muscles. Move your awareness up to your face. Relax your jaw, mouth, nose, eyes, earlobes, facial muscles, forehead, all the way to the top of your head. Feel that your whole body is completely relaxed. Scan your system from top to toe, and if there is any part of your body that is still tense, painful, or unwell, immerse it for a while longer in the healing energy of Mother Earth. When you are ready, move your attention to your heart. Rest there for a little while. Feel immersed in the love and light in your heart. Remain still and quiet, and slowly become absorbed in yourself. Remain absorbed for as long as you want, until you feel ready to come out.
So that was a little glimpse of heartfulness relaxation meditation. We will share the links with you. These techniques are free of cost. Relaxation is one of the techniques. There is also a technique called cleaning, because we clean our bodies every day, but we forget to clean our minds. And the mind is where we gather all these impressions throughout the day, throughout our life, and people say also in our previous lives, if we believe in life after life. So there are techniques to clear some of those the heaviness, the baggage that we carry in our minds. There is a beautiful, powerful technique around that, and that also can be found on Heartfulness website. And then there is meditation with a trainer, meditation on your own. that you can do 20 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever time that you find, usually in the morning. And then we have a prayer or a short meditation at night. And we have group meditations every Sunday. In the COVID-19 times, these group meditations are online if you would like to join. There are centers in many countries, in many cities around the globe. So it's a growing movement. And yes, and you can take 3 sessions with a trainer, and then you get kind of an experience, a taste of meditation with what is known as pranahuti or yogic transmission, which is a very it's a healing energy. Basically, it's a powerful energy coming your way just to help you to calm your mind and further deepen your connection to yourself, to the core of who you are, who we are. So I really encourage all of you to look up these techniques, and there is no harm if you can experiment with yourself. And as the current guide of heartfulness, Daji, we call him with reverence, we call him Daji, or Kamlesh Patel is his name, as he says, you're the experiment, you're the experimenter. So try to experiment on yourself, and if it works for you, use it. If it doesn't work for you, doesn't matter. There are so many beautiful systems that you can look around. But I think I have personally found it very effective in my life to deal with the challenges that I have been facing. So I really encourage you to look at some of these systems that are around for so many years, that are based on our ancestral knowledge. How do we take care of ourselves, our inner core? Because ourselves and the outer world are interrelated. Only when we take care of ourselves can we care for others. Only when we nurture ourselves can we nurture other beings. So I really encourage you. So thank you all the panelists for your time and for the wonderful insights that you've given us. The recording will be available, and we encourage our audience to post their comments and questions when they view the recording. It will be continuously available, and the panelists and myself will try to answer the questions and the comments that the audience raises. And I hope many more forums will be initiated like this one. This is just a drop in the ocean, because we want to bring out the people's perspectives from the grassroots and to tell our leaders that this is the reality on the ground, so that there is no disconnect between what is happening at the policy level and what is being actually felt and experienced by some of these communities on the ground. So thank you to all the panelists. Have a beautiful day. It was really amazing and heartwarming to hear about the kind of work that you're doing, and wishing you a lot of strength, a lot of courage, and a lot of good wishes to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you, Vanmala. Namaste.
Thank you, Vanmala, Abhi. Thank you, Femy.
Abhi.